We put tariffs on everybody in the world. There's different tariffs for different parts of the world depending on economic circumstances and that, but the concept of tariffs is uniformly applied to everyone that we trade with.
2 weeks ago, that was Washington's official position on Canada. Pete Hoekstra, the United States ambassador to Canada, sitting down for an interview and delivering the clearest and most direct message the Trump administration had sent about the trade conflict. No exceptions. Accept it. Does Canada even want to do business with the United States? Absolutely no understanding of why Canadians might be frustrated. Then Mark Carney boarded a plane to New York, walked into the Economic Club of New York, and said something in front of the CEOs and fund managers who have the most influence over American economic policy that Washington did not expect to hear. Canada Strong will help make America great again. This week, Pete Hoekstra responded to that line publicly. He called it worth repeating. He said the Trump administration heard the message. He said this positive approach could open doors in Washington. Same ambassador, same trade conflict, 2 weeks apart, completely different tone. Something changed. And understanding what changed and why tells you more about where this trade conflict is actually heading than anything either government has said officially. Start with what Hoekstra was actually saying 2 weeks ago, because to understand how significant the shift is, you need to understand how absolute the original position was.
But the concept of tariffs is uniformly applied to everyone that we trade with. You've got folks who are doing everything they can to get the Canadian public to rally against America. It just doesn't make any sense.
But do you understand where that frustration is coming from?
Absolutely no.
Absolutely no. No exceptions. Those two phrases defined Washington's public position on Canada for the better part of 18 months. And they were not accidental. They were a deliberate communication strategy designed to signal that the Trump administration had no intention of treating Canada differently from any other country in its tariff framework, regardless of the historical depth of the bilateral relationship, the integrated nature of the supply chains, or the fact that Canada had a signed trade agreement that Washington itself had negotiated, ratified, and praised. The message Hoekstra was delivering in that interview was not primarily aimed at Canadian audiences. It was aimed at American constituencies that had been applying pressure on the administration to create exemptions for specific industries and specific trading partners. No exceptions was a message to American steel manufacturers, American auto producers, American agricultural interests, that the tariff framework would not be selectively relaxed based on who lobbied hardest. The absolutely no understanding of Canadian frustration was even more deliberately calculated because it served a specific rhetorical purpose. If Washington acknowledged that Canadian frustration was legitimate, it was implicitly acknowledging that the tariffs were causing unjustified harm. By claiming incomprehension, Hoekstra was delegitimizing the frustration rather than engaging with its substance. That was the Washington position 2 weeks ago. Absolute, unyielding, deliberately dismissive. And then Carney went to New York. Now for the specific thing Carney did in New York that produced a different response from the same ambassador who 2 weeks earlier had expressed absolute no understanding of Canadian frustration.
Canada is America's largest customer. We buy more goods from America than China, Japan, and Germany combined. Those common interests run through our supply chains, where 70% of Canadian exports are inputs to American cars, homes, aircraft, machinery, finished goods, creating hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. value add. They run through our energy partnership, where, at a time of a global energy crisis, Canada provides the United States with reliable power, with critical minerals that help fuel American growth. 99% of U.S. natural gas imports, 85% of electricity imports, 60% of crude oil imports. That is mutual strength. Let's be absolutely clear. Canada Strong will help make America great again.
Canada Strong will help make America great again. That line is the one Hoekstra called worth repeating. And understanding why it landed differently than anything Canada had said before requires understanding what Carney was doing that was structurally different from previous Canadian communication about the trade conflict. Previous Canadian messaging about the trade conflict had been framed primarily from a Canadian perspective. Tariffs are hurting Canadian workers. The relationship is important to Canada. Canada wants a resolution. All of those statements are true. None of them give Washington a reason to change its position, because they are arguments for why Canada needs relief, not arguments for why Washington should provide it. Carney in New York did something different. He made the argument from Washington's perspective, not what Canada needs, what America gets from a strong Canada. Canada buys more American goods than China, Japan, and Germany combined. 70% of Canadian exports are inputs to American finished goods. 99% of American natural gas imports. 85% of American electricity imports. 60% of American crude oil imports. Every one of those numbers is an argument for why a strong Canada serves American interests. Not Canadian interests, American interests. And Canada Strong will help make America great again explicitly frames Canadian economic strength as a contributor to the American agenda, rather than a competing interest. That framing gave Hoekstra something he had not previously had, a way to acknowledge Canadian arguments without appearing to capitulate to Canadian pressure. Worth repeating is not a concession. It is an endorsement of a framing that serves Washington's domestic political narrative. And Carney handed it to him deliberately. Now for what Hoekstra's response actually signals about where the trade conflict is heading. Because worth repeating, and the message was heard at the White House, are very specific diplomatic language choices that tell you something precise about what is happening inside Washington right now.
And our response begins by reimagining aspects of North American integration. And to be absolutely clear, Canada, like Mexico, Canada remains open to deeper integration, including options for Fortress North America in selected sectors. And to be clear, those offers are on the table. But if that route is not ultimately possible, we will invest heavily in new markets and products. We'll reward those who build, buy, and produce in Canada, and we will build new partnerships abroad.
Those offers are on the table. Carney has been saying that since January. The Fortress North America framework, a jointly protected economic zone in aluminum, steel, automotive production, and critical minerals that would serve both countries' interests more than the current tariff regime serves either. For 18 months, Washington's response to that offer was the Hoekstra interview. No exceptions, accept it. Absolutely no understanding. Now the response is worth repeating. The message was heard. This positive approach could open doors. That is not an acceptance of the Fortress North America offer, but it is something more important than a rejection. It is the first public signal from a named Washington official that the framing Carney used in New York is politically useful to the Trump administration rather than politically inconvenient. And here is why that matters enormously. The trade conflict has been stuck not primarily because of substantive disagreement about what a deal should look like. Canada and the United States have broadly compatible interests in aluminum, steel, automotive, and critical minerals. A Fortress North America framework in those sectors would deliver more American manufacturing jobs, more American energy security, and more American supply chain resilience than the current tariff regime. The conflict has been stuck because of domestic political framing. The Trump administration cannot publicly embrace a framework that looks like it accommodates Canadian pressure. Canada Strong will help make America great again gives Washington exactly the framing it needs. A deal that serves the American agenda rather than a capitulation to Canadian demands. Hoekstra's response suggests that framing has been received and is being processed at the White House level. That is the first real movement in 18 months. Now for what comes next. Because Hoekstra's change in tone lands at a very specific and very consequential moment in the bilateral timeline.
Prime Minister Carney said something worth repeating. The Trump administration has clearly heard the message that protective tariffs and the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement revision should work for the benefit of both countries. This positive approach could open doors in Washington.
Could open doors. That is the most carefully chosen phrase in Hoekstra's entire response. Not will open doors, not has opened doors, could open doors. That conditionality is doing two things simultaneously. It is signaling genuine receptivity to the Carney framing without committing Washington to a specific outcome. And it is placing the responsibility for what happens next back on Canada. If the doors open, it will be because Canada continues to engage in the way it engaged in New York. If they do not open, it will be because something in the Canadian approach changes or because other factors intervene. The timing of Hoekstra's response is also significant. July the 1st is days away. The Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement review checkpoint that both countries have been building toward. Canada's trade minister has meetings scheduled in Washington ahead of that date. Mexico has already concluded its first formal negotiation round. The structural pressure for Canada to also be at the table in a meaningful way is building. Hoekstra's could open doors is the diplomatic equivalent of a yellow light, not a green, but also not the red that no exceptions and absolutely no understanding represented 2 weeks ago. And here is what makes Carney's New York speech so strategically significant in retrospect. He did not go to New York to beg Washington for relief. He went to build the coalition of American business interests, the CEOs and fund managers and infrastructure investors in that room who benefit from a strong Canada and who have the political influence in Washington to make could open doors become will open doors. Canada Strong will help make America great again. Hoekstra called it worth repeating. The question now is whether Washington will act on it before July the 1st, or whether Canada's alternative architecture, the pipeline, the trade agreements, the defense partnerships, the 5 countries that chose Canada over America this year, become so established that the offer becomes less essential to Canada than it is today. 2 weeks, 1 ambassador, 2 completely different messages. No exceptions, absolutely no understanding. Accept it. That was Hoekstra 2 weeks ago. Worth repeating. The message was heard. This positive approach could open doors. That is Hoekstra today. What changed is not Washington's position on tariffs. The tariffs are still in place. What changed is the framing that Carney introduced in New York. Canada Strong will help make America great again reframes the entire bilateral relationship from a zero-sum conflict over who gives up more into a shared project of mutual strength that serves both countries' stated agendas. That reframing is politically useful to Washington in a way that nothing Canada had said previously was. It allows the Trump administration to engage with Canada's proposals without appearing to retreat from America first. It allows Hoekstra to call something worth repeating without acknowledging that 2 weeks ago he was saying the opposite. And it happened because Carney went to the right room, the Economic Club of New York, Wall Street, the people whose capital flows through the supply chains that the tariffs are taxing, the people whose quarterly earnings depend on a functional Canada-United States economic relationship. the people who have the most direct access to the White House when they want to make a point about trade policy. Carney did not change Washington's mind by arguing with Washington. He changed it by making the argument to the people Washington listens to, could open doors. July the 1st is days away. The doors are cracked, and Carney is holding the handle. Stay with this channel for every development as this story reaches its most consequential chapter.